There are periods in life when nothing feels alive. You wake up, you go through the motions, you speak when spoken to, you fill your time, you complete your tasks, but the inner spark that once made each moment feel colored, textured, and meaningful simply isn't there. You're not deeply sad, you're not overwhelmed, you're not falling apart, you're just flat. As if the emotional flavor of life has been dialed down so quietly that you didn't notice it happening until almost everything tastes like the same gray tone. It's one of the strangest experiences a person can have because technically, nothing is wrong. Your life still functions, you still perform, you still respond, you still exist in the world, yet the connection between you and your experiences has thinned. You can see yourself living, but you don't feel yourself living. And that gap, that subtle detachment, is where the collapse of meaning begins. Alan Watts once said that what we call enjoyment is less about pleasure and more about participation. Not just being somewhere, but actually being there. Not just eating, but tasting. Not just talking, but connecting. Enjoyment is what happens when the mind and the moment meet each other fully. And when enjoyment collapses, it's almost always because something has quietly disrupted that meeting. Before we go into the deeper layers of why nothing feels enjoyable anymore, we need to lay down a few foundations. First, enjoyment is not pleasure, it's engagement. You can feel pleasure mechanically, you can distract yourself, stimulate yourself, entertain yourself, but enjoyment comes from the mind being involved in the experience. Without engagement, pleasure becomes hollow, and eventually even stimulation becomes background noise. Second, the human mind experiences enjoyment through meaning, not sensation. Meaning is the bridge between what you do and how it feels. When that bridge weakens, pleasure quickly becomes empty. The food is the same, but the meaning attached to it fades. The music is the same, but it doesn't resonate. The activity is the same, but the inner why behind it has collapsed. Third, modern life runs on stimulation, not meaning, and stimulation by nature wears out the mind. You can consume endless content without generating a single moment of genuine enjoyment. Stimulation uses up your attention. Meaning uses attention differently. It nourishes. When life becomes dominated by stimulation instead of depth, enjoyment collapses without warning. Fourth, the collapse of enjoyment doesn't start with a dramatic moment. It begins quietly, long before you consciously notice it. Meaning decays in silence. You don't lose enjoyment because something catastrophic happened. You lose it because your inner connection to experiences slowly dissolved. And fifth, enjoyment requires sustained attention. When your mind becomes fragmented, pulled in a dozen directions, constantly interrupted, constantly distracted, you lose the mental continuity required to feel the richness of a moment. Enjoyment cannot survive in a scattered mind. These foundations prepare the ground for the real reasons why your inner world feels flat. What follows are the 10 deep truths Alan Watts would reveal about the collapse of inner meaning. First reason. Meaning collapses when you stop participating in the present moment. One of the most overlooked truths about enjoyment is that it isn't found in the thing itself. It's found in your presence during the thing. You don't enjoy a cup of coffee because coffee is magical. You enjoy it because your mind is fully there, tasting, sensing, receiving. You don't enjoy good company just because the person is interesting. You enjoy it because you are present enough to connect. But somewhere along the way, you stopped participating in your own moments. Not intentionally, not dramatically. Part of you simply drifted. You're doing things, but you're not in them. You're seeing life, but you're not inhabiting it. You're watching your experiences from a distance, like someone looking through glass. Watts said this is one of the great illusions of modern life, that you can live without actually being present. The mind starts observing instead of experiencing. It becomes a commentator instead of a participant. You begin to narrate your life instead of living it. And when that happens, enjoyment collapses because the mind has walked out of the room. Enjoyment requires presence. Meaning requires presence. Connection requires presence. Without presence, even the most beautiful experience feels like nothing. This is the first fracture in your relationship with life. You haven't lost your ability to enjoy, you've lost your place inside your own experience. 2. You stopped enjoying things because your inner world is overstimulated and under-engaged. This is the modern crisis nobody notices until it's too late. We live in a world where the mind is constantly stimulated. Notifications, scrolling, noise, endless movement. That stimulation is not engagement. Stimulation drains the mind. Engagement feeds it. And when your mind becomes overstimulated, two things happen. Your baseline for pleasure rises unnaturally high. Your ability to feel subtle enjoyment drops to almost zero. This is why nothing feels enjoyable anymore. It's not because your life is dull. It's because your inner world is exhausted from noise. Stimulation creates emotional inflation. You need more and more intensity to feel less and less. Your nervous system adapts to the constant input, and everything slows down internally. Simple joys, quiet moments, small pleasures, natural experiences can no longer reach you. They're too subtle for a mind trained to crave intensity. Alan Watts often criticized how modern people mistake stimulation for life. He said, "You run faster and faster, only to discover you are moving inside the same circle. When stimulation dominates, engagement dies, and when engagement dies, enjoyment collapses." This isn't numbness. It's saturation. Your emotional receptors are tired, not broken. You lost enjoyment because your mind has been overfilled, not because you've been emptied. 3. You don't enjoy anything because everything has become functional instead of experiential. This is one of the quietest but most devastating shifts a human being can experience. At some point, without realizing it, your life stopped being a series of experiences and turned into a series of tasks. Everything became functional. You drink coffee not to enjoy it, but to stay awake. You see friends not to connect, but because it's expected. You relax not because you feel peace, but because you're supposed to unwind. You do hobbies like obligations. You consume entertainment like anesthesia. Your life became efficient. And in that efficiency, meaning collapsed. Watts said the tragedy of adulthood is not that people lose their innocence, it's that they lose their sense of being alive inside the moment. They treat life like something to manage rather than something to explore, and slowly, imperceptibly, enjoyment dies under the weight of functionality. When everything becomes a tool, nothing becomes meaningful. When everything becomes purposeful, nothing becomes pleasurable. When everything becomes routine, nothing becomes alive. You are not empty. Your life has been flattened into utility. 4. Enjoyment disappears when novelty dies, and depth never replaces it. Human beings are wired for two kinds of experience: novelty and depth. Novelty stimulates curiosity. Depth sustains meaning. In childhood, novelty is easy. Everything is new. The mind is fresh. The world feels like an unfolding mystery. But adulthood gradually strips life of novelty. Not because the world changes, but because you stop seeing it with new eyes. That's natural. But here's the real problem. When novelty fades, most people never replace it with depth. Instead, they repeat the same motions, the same thoughts, the same routines, the same consumer patterns, the same emotional cycles. Life becomes a loop without texture. And when novelty is gone and depth never arrives, the mind enters a drought. Not a crisis, not depression. A drought of curiosity. Alan Watts said that most adults don't suffer from sadness. They suffer from the dryness of a life that no longer feels mysterious. When everything becomes familiar, predictable, known, and repetitive, the inner world stops producing meaning. A mind that doesn't encounter anything new eventually becomes bored with itself. Enjoyment collapses, because your experiences lack both surprise and significance. Life didn't become empty. Your relationship to novelty did. 5. Meaning collapses. When your internal curiosity shuts down. Curiosity isn't just about wanting to learn something. Curiosity is the engine that turns experiences into enjoyment. When you enjoy something, a conversation, a view, a song, it's because your mind is leaning toward it, exploring it, engaging with it. Curiosity pulls you into the world. It gives experiences their psychological richness. Without curiosity, nothing feels alive enough for enjoyment to emerge. But curiosity doesn't disappear because you lost interest. It disappears because you've been mentally exhausted for too long. A mind that is overstimulated, constantly interrupted, emotionally overloaded, pressured to perform, dragged through routines, and forced to stay alert, loses its natural capacity for curiosity. Not permanently, but deeply. The collapse of curiosity always feels like the collapse of enjoyment, because they are the same collapse. Watts said, "When you're no longer curious, the world appears flat, not because it is, but because the light inside you is dim. Curiosity is the inner flame. Without it, nothing catches fire. You didn't lose enjoyment. You lost the mental energy required for curiosity to move. When curiosity sleeps, meaning sleeps. And when meaning sleeps, enjoyment cannot appear." 6. You stop enjoying things when you lose the inner witness. There is a part of you that observes life from the inside, the part that notices when something feels right, when something resonates, when something touches you. That inner witness is what gives life its emotional echo. It amplifies experiences. It notices the subtleties. It registers the beauty in small things. It feels the moment, not just sees it. But when you've been living in survival mode or autopilot or overstimulation for too long, the inner witness grows silent. Not absent, just quiet. And when that inner witness goes quiet, the emotional dimension of life collapses. You become more mechanical, more functional, more reactive. You still live, but you live without an internal narrator, without the silent part of you that feels the weight of things. Watts said that awareness is not thinking, awareness is presence. Without awareness, you perceive the world, but you don't feel it. It's the difference between hearing music versus listening to it, watching a sunset versus feeling it, speaking words versus connecting, going somewhere versus arriving, doing something versus experiencing it. When the inner witness is inactive, life becomes a sequence of actions, not experiences. This is why nothing feels like anything. Not because life is empty, but because the inner part of you that gives life meaning is taking a pause. You haven't lost enjoyment. You've lost the internal witness that interprets experience emotionally. 7. The collapse of meaning is the collapse of imagination. This is the deepest part of the middle collapse. Most people think enjoyment comes from the outside world, from events, activities, people, objects. But Alan Watts argued the opposite. Enjoyment comes from the imagination interacting with the world. The world offers the raw material. Imagination adds the emotional dimension. Without imagination, even a beautiful moment feels flat. Even a joyful experience feels muted. Even an exciting opportunity feels empty. Imagination gives meaning its shape. It creates anticipation, desire, resonance, interpretation. It turns the world into something worth participating in. But here's the truth almost no one realizes. Your imagination collapses long before you notice the collapse of enjoyment. You stop imagining the future. You stop daydreaming. You stop thinking in color. You stop attaching your inner world to outer moments. You stop feeling possibility. You stop giving meaning a place to land. Without imagination, meaning has nowhere to grow. And when meaning cannot grow, enjoyment cannot exist. It's not sadness. It's not emptiness. It's the quiet death of the internal theater that once made life vivid. Watts said that humans do not suffer from meaninglessness. They suffer from lack of imagination. Your imagination has gone quiet. And the world feels quiet with it. 8. Enjoyment collapses because your inner direction has gone quiet. Most people think they lose enjoyment because they're uninspired or tired. But the truth is much simpler and much more profound. Enjoyment fades when you don't know where you're going internally. Meaning requires direction, not a plan, not a goal, not an ambition. Just direction, a quiet sense of psychological forward movement. When you have direction, even small experiences feel alive because they're part of an unfolding. You're not just eating dinner. You're eating dinner as someone who is moving towards something. You're not just working, you're working with some inner sense of trajectory. You're not just living, you're growing. But when your inner direction collapses, the world flattens instantly. Food loses its taste. Time loses its texture. People lose their emotional depth. Moments lose their space inside you. Not because they're meaningless, but because nothing ties them together. Alan Watts described it as the moment when the inner arrow disappears. The arrow doesn't point backward or forward. It simply stops pointing anywhere. You don't know what you want. You don't know what you're moving toward. Your mind isn't lost. It's simply motionless. And when the arrow disappears, enjoyment disappears with it. Not because life lacks beauty, but because beauty needs context. It needs an inner frame to sit inside. Without direction, the frame collapses and experiences fall through the cracks. You're not empty. Your direction is simply silent. And until that direction reawakens, enjoyment cannot attach itself to anything. Knifing feels enjoyable because your inner meaning system is resetting. This is the most misunderstood part of the entire experience. When people lose enjoyment, they panic. They assume something is wrong with them. They assume they've broken somewhere inside. They assume they've lost their ability to feel. But what they're experiencing is something Alan Watts often called a meaning reset, a natural but uncomfortable psychological process. Every few years, your inner meaning system collapses so it can rebuild. Not because life has failed, but because you have changed. Not because your world is empty, but because your old meaning structure is outdated. Meaning is not permanent. Meaning is built from the inside out. And every so often, it needs to dissolve so you can form a newer, deeper version of it. The loss of enjoyment is not a malfunction. It's the clearing stage of the reset. You're not broken. You're being restructured. Here's what this reset feels like. You can't force yourself to care. You feel emotionally neutral instead of reactive. You don't feel pulled toward anything. Old goals feel irrelevant. Old desires feel foreign. Old habits feel empty. Old meanings feel expired, and this is not numbness. This is recalibration. Your inner world is clearing out the outdated meaning structures that can't take you into the next stage of your life. Meaning has to be emptied before it can be rebuilt. And during that clearing phase, enjoyment has no foundation to stand on. Think of it like a house renovation. You can't live comfortably while the interior is being torn down. Your inner world is in renovation mode. Nothing feels enjoyable because the furniture of meaning has been temporarily removed. This is not the end of meaning. This is the space before new meaning arrives. Enjoyment returns only when inner meaning rebuilds, and that rebuild starts in silence. Here is the final truth, the one that brings the entire collapse into perspective. Meaning does not return through effort. It does not return through force. It does not return because you push yourself. It does not return when you fix your mindset. It does not return through artificial positivity or forced gratitude. Meaning returns slowly, quietly, naturally, the way dawn returns after night. It rebuilds in silence, not activity. And this is why you don't enjoy anything right now. Your meaning is being rebuilt, but it's happening underground. When the mind becomes still, when your identity loosens, when your curiosity sleeps, when old desires fade, when your imagination slows, that is the moment when your inner world begins to prepare for something new. Meaning is not a decision, it is a recognition. It reappears when a new inner direction forms. It awakens when a new curiosity sparks. It grows when a new imagination returns. It deepens when the inner witness opens its eyes again. Watts said, "The silence is not empty, it is the place from which everything begins." You are in that place right now. That is why you don't enjoy anything. Not because your life lacks meaning, but because meaning is reorganizing itself at a depth you cannot yet see. The silence you feel is not the absence of life. It is the soil in which a new inner life is being planted. Enjoyment will return. but it will return as a companion to the meaning that grows from this silence. If life feels empty, it's not because the world has lost its color, it's because your mind has stopped painting. Meaning rises from the inside, and sometimes the inner canvas needs to be blank before something new can appear. Enjoyment is not something you chase, it's something that arises when your life begins to resonate with you again. The quiet you're feeling now is not the end of anything. It's the space in which meaning prepares to return.